Good morning. You are listening to Baptist for Liberty. Today is July 28th, and I'm your host, Joanna Works. Alright, today being Monday, I'm going to go through some news stories. And, of course, this month, even last month, the majority of the stories have either been on immigration, the Israel-Palestine conflict, plane crashes, or ISIS, or stories somehow related to one or both of those four topics. Now, of course, this is midterm election year. And so there's also a lot of news on political races here in the U.S., which we certainly want to look at a little bit as we can. Let's see, I think it was last Friday we saw a story where the Kentucky Senate race is one of the biggest races of this year in the political season, and so much so that you have a fake candidate running just to get attention to how much money is thrown into these election processes, and money tends to win out over principle because you get your name recognition, you can cover the market, and people might just vote based on that because, they've heard your name enough to have a vague idea of who you are, as opposed to perhaps the other candidates. Okay. Anyway, so we're going to try to cover more stories than just those four, but they will, of course, pop up frequently because those are the big stories. And of course, we will try to get more local stuff in here as well. Alright, so starting off with Monday, July 21st, we have a story from thedailydot.com. People in swing states don't talk politics on Facebook, poll shows. And this story it goes over some poll data and compares those in swing states versus those who are solid blue or solid red. And I thought that was an interesting one. Also, in riot outside synagogue, French Jews were left to to protect themselves. Excuse me, I'm stuttering all over the place. This is from the JewishExponent.com. And excuse me, I tried to post a couple different stories that had different perspectives on this particular riot, although there was a couple more that had similar going-ons in France, about a week apart. So on Tuesday, July 22nd, another news group, al-Akhbar.com, did an article on Gaza conflict exposes France's own struggles with xenophobe. And this particular article goes in deeper to the political makeup and ethnic and culture friction in France. So I thought that was really detailed, and they made some really interesting points in that. Definitely worth reading. And just as a reminder, as always, links to these articles mentioned will be on our homepage. I will try to get them posted right after posting the podcast. Alright, so next we have NYPD has received over 1,000 complaints of police chokeholds used since 2009. This is an article from benswan.com. One of the many things and stories that benswan.com is pretty good about following is stories on police brutality or excessive force. In this one, they go through the data on chokeholds, which has become a big issue since a police officer choked to death a man who was asthmatic. And it's important to note that chokeholds has as a use in the New York department. This isn't across the board, but in New York, They're not supposed to use chokeholds at all. So that's an interesting story, and it goes through, like I said, the data, the information, the changes in the laws on chokeholds, and the investigations on these complaints. Also published on Tuesday was an article from the Pan Am Post, Hernandez's Plan Honduras, in quotation marks, a recipe for more drug war violence. This was an opinion piece, but it was an interesting one. The second paragraph of this article says, the fact is Honduras has been mortally wounded. The country is on the edge of the abyss, and its president is too confused to avoid pushing Honduran society into a free-for-all. The migration surge of women and children from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala to the United States triggered a crisis. However, the imminent deportation of thousands of young kids who journey to the United States in search of better opportunities hides an even bigger problem, the war on drugs. And it continues, it has a graph here, unaccompanied alien children encountered by physical year, and gives the years from 2009 to 2014. Keep in mind, of course, we're only halfway through this year. And it compares the immigrations of El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico. And where Mexico had been our largest influx of unaccompanied immigrants, it slowly shrunk back a little bit from 2009. So in 2011 it had the least, and then 2012 it went up just a little bit more. 2013 shot up again, and then 2014 it went back down again. Meanwhile, the Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador children has risen, and Honduras, who used to be like one of the least, is now the most amount of unaccompanied children crossing the U.S. border. And this is, of course, just the ones that's encountered by authorities. So if you click on the link on our homepage for this article, you can see this chart. I think it's interesting to see the comparison, and this author and opinion piece goes into the drug war and how this is the president of Honduras is throwing more gasoline on the fire here. Let's see, below the chart it says, last week Hernandez met in Tegucigalpa with 7 U.S. congressmen, where he requested support from the U.S. government to design a plan to combat drug traffickers. According to the Honduran president, the driving force behind the violence that plagues his country is the illegal drug trade. He believes the southward expansion of Mexican drug cartels into Central America to be a consequence of Plan Colombia and the Merida Initiative. Counter-narcotics operations carried out in Colombia and Mexico with the financial and logistical support of the United States. As a result, drug gangs that previously operated in Mexico and Colombia have relocated to Honduras, bringing even more violence and death to the Central American country. Hernandez points the finger at the United States for the high rates of violence in Honduras, just as the guidelines for a traditional Latin American politician would suggest. According to the latest official statistics available, Honduras is the most violent country in the world. In 2012, the country's homicide rate was 90.4 per 100,000 inhabitants, 30 times the rate in Chile, the safest of all Latin American countries. Honduras is living through a wave of crime that causes an average of 15 deaths per day, Honduran authorities have affirmed. In this context, common sense would suggest that Hernandez's position in requesting U.S. assistance in an anti-drug initiative is reasonable. If the reason behind the high rate of violence is drug trafficking, then implementing a plan similar to those in Colombia and Mexico should solve the violence problem in Honduras. What Hernandez ignores, however, is that the enforcement of U.S.-designed and funded counter-narcotics initiatives only brings more death and violence and do nothing to solve the actual problem. Plan Colombia was a failure and the Merida Initiative, in effect since 2006, has resulted in more than 80,000 deaths. Over 80,000 people have been killed in Mexico during the last 8 years of its war on drugs. During the U.S. initiative in Vietnam, the number of U.S. Americans killed in 10 years was 58,000, said Daniel Gomez, a former Drug Enforcement Administration agent. In Honduras, with a population less than 1/10 the size of Mexico, 46,450 people were killed between 2000 and 2011. An Honduran version of the Merida Initiative could be the component that triggers a conflict of a catastrophic proportion. And you can read the rest of the article at the link provided. Let's see. Wednesday, July 23rd, Mayor has senior citizens arrested for asking officials to speak up. This is a story from benswan.com. It reports last Friday a contentious meeting of the Greene County, Tennessee Industrial Development Board ended in outrage. A 76-year-old veteran, Eddie Overholt, was arrested for asking officials who were speaking quietly among themselves rather than using the room's public address system to speak louder. Overholt was worried that seniors in the back of the room were unable to hear the discussion, which concerned a controversial plan to allow U.S. nitrogen to build a pipeline into the Nolichucky River. And of course, this is one of those local stories. It was on their local news on this initiative and issue, and people show up for the public discussion. But when they try to actually be involved in the public discussion, it looks like the board there didn't want them to actually have any say in what they were going to do. And you can read this full story, of course, at the link provided as well. Leopoldo Lopez's wife visits D.C., denounces his political imprisonment. So there's a lot of stories coming out having to do with Venezuela right now. And this one, a wife of a Venezuelan politician, was visiting Washington, D.C., and she's visiting other places and talking on behalf of her husband, who is in prison in Venezuela right now. Some of the other places she's going to visit, she's previously made stops in Colombia and many European cities, including Madrid, Paris, and Rome, where she was received by Pope Francis. I don't know all of the sides and turmoils in Venezuela, but it certainly pops up a lot when you're looking at Central American news. Near the end of the article, after a number of complaints and reports were filed by the defense in previous months, Lopez and the mayors of San Diego, Carabobo, and San Cristobal, Táchira, Enzo Scarano, and Daniel Ceballos were finally able to exert their rights as prisoners. Lopez is a prisoner in the Ramo Verde military prison. He is facing charges of conspiracy and instigation of violence related to the protest marches he led on February 12th in Caracas. Lopez turned himself in to authorities in dramatic fashion on February 18th after leading a march through Caracas alongside thousands of protesters. From the New American, UN peacekeepers, military using drones with Obama support. So the peacekeeping part, of course, is in quotation marks. And, of course, UN usage of drones is not going to be used with weapons, of course, is what the UN says. One day, possibly soon, they could also carry deadly weapons such as missiles, despite UN claims that it has no current plans, in quotation marks, to arm its UAVs, analysts, and officials are still expressing fears about the existing program and especially its future potential for abuse and mayhem. These drones are being used in Central African Republic and South Sudan right now. And of course, even, the drones, it's just, they're spying on people. And it's not always just what you label terrorists. And one person's terrorist is just another person's opposition party, Top-down digital currency coming to Ecuador with ban on competition. So this is a story from the Pan Am Post on, I'll go ahead and read part of this. Ecuador's Congress, dominated by the ruling socialist PAES alliance, is on the verge of approving a new reform presented by President Rafael Correa as an urgent matter. The law is for the creation of a digital currency and financial regulation system controlled by the executive. At the same time, it prohibits any digital currency emitted by institutions other than the nation's central bank. Debate over the reform began at 9:30 a.m. local time on Tuesday after 62 amendments from the Assembly's Economic Commission. These came after Correa presented the original version on June 25th, but none of the changes are structural or overturn the intent. If you want the rest of the story, click on the link, please. Okay, Thursday, July 24th. ATF guns are the problem. This is from the New America. Initial hopes were that somehow the bad press that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, still known as ATF, has been receiving had caused the agency to pull back in its prosecution of criminal cases involving guns, but those hopes have faded. Reports from Syracuse University showed that there were 6,791 such prosecutions recommended by the ATF in President George W. Bush's last year, 2008, while there were just 5,082 gun violation cases under Obama in 2013, a decline of 25%. The all-time high occurred during the Bush administration in 2004, when 8,752 cases were brought by the Justice Department, and so far this year, prosecutions have declined even further, likely to end the year at fewer than 4,400 if the present trend continues. On the surface, this appears to contradict the president, who stated following the Newtown massacre, "We should get tougher on people who buy guns with the express purpose of turning around and selling them to criminals, and we should severely punish anybody who helps them do this." The obvious incongruity between these numbers and public pronouncements by the anti-gun president was reflected by Robert Cottrell, professor of George Washington University. We have this irony: the Obama administration, which is asking for more in the way of gun regulations, is actually prosecuting less of the gun laws already on the books. Many excuses were offered to explain the dichotomy, among them budget cuts and bad press. This appeared to be reinforced by some ATF agents interviewed anonymously by the Washington Times, who said the agency had been burned by the scandals such as Fast and Furious, and an extensive report by USA Today on a setting up fake stings to entrap potential criminals. And it gives a quote there. There was sequestration, which a spokesman from the ATF used to explain the apparent decline. ATF faces key resources challenges and staff attrition. Resources are limited and difficult choices must be made with regard to priorities. The press has certainly been bad for the ATF. The Fast and Furious gun running scandal has become common knowledge in the United States, while the USA Today study is causing people to link false stings with the ATF as well. Back in June 2013, journalists at the paper invested hundreds of man-hours poring over thousands of pages of court records and agency files, not including hours of undercover recordings of sting operations that transcended the law. According to the paper, here's how the ATF conjured stings to create arrests and convictions. The stings work like this. When agents identify someone they suspect is ripping off drug dealers, they send in an undercover operative posing as a disgruntled courier or security guard to pitch the idea of stealing a shipment from his bosses. The potential score is almost always more than 5 kilograms of cocaine, enough drugs to fetch hundreds of thousands of dollars on the street or to trigger sentences of 10 years or more in prison. When the target shows up ready to commit the robbery, he and anyone else he brings with him are arrested and charged with a raft of federal crimes, the most serious of which is conspiracy to sell the non-existent cocaine. Upon conviction, the unsuspecting target could spend the next 25 years of his life in jail. USA Today quoted a former ATF supervisor who asked rhetorically, "Do you want police to solve crimes, or do you want them to go out and prevent crimes that haven't occurred yet?" Another ATF source defended the practice. "Are we supposed to wait for him to commit a murder before we target him as a bad guy? Are we going to sit back and say, well, this guy doesn't have a bad record. Okay, so, throw him back out there, let him kill somebody, then when he gets a bad record, then we're going to put him in jail?" Judges have increasingly answered that question by calling such things disreputable, tawdry, and bordering on entrapment. A closer look at what the ATF is doing, however, shows a change in direction with undiminished enthusiasm. The focus now is not on the criminal and his crime, either present or future, but instead on the gun, who's making it, shipping it, or buying it. For that, the ATF is using an obscure section of the 1934 National Firearms Act, NFA, that allows the agency to go after violations perceived in the making, shipping, buying, and selling of firearms. The rules are tricky and often difficult to follow. And it gives a brief synopsis of it. Snippet, excuse me. Alright, and let's see. No trial, no hearing. Venezuelan students remain imprisoned. Hamas calls FAA flight suspension a great victory, while U.S. politicians call it an overreaction. And that story is from the Inquisitor on the FFA ending flights to Tel Aviv. UN school in Gaza caught in the crosshairs, leaving 15 dead. So the UN has some schools in the Gaza, and they've been caught in the Hamas in IDF fighting. I believe IDF is the right initials for that. The Israeli Defense Force. Yeah. Okay. Also, released Sudanese Christian Miriam Ibrahim in Italy receives Pope Francis' blessing. This is also from Inquisitor.com. And the Miriam Ibrahim is a woman that's been all over social media, being a Christian in the Sudan, and facing severe persecution for being a Christian. And a lot of Americans, it seems especially, have been posting and keeping track of this story. She was imprisoned while pregnant and gave birth even while in prison, so she had been released for a short time and then rearrested and finally released again and brought to safety in Italy. Stop violence in the name of religion. This comes from Al Monitor, and this was an interesting article. Now, I do want to put this caveat and warning about the tone of this article being, I forget the proper term here, like universal religion. But that doesn't invalidate all of its points or some of the facts that he brings out here. In recent days, we have read with horror about Christians being asked to leave the city of Mosul within 24 hours. We have also heard about the discretion of Christian holy spaces and their symbols, the bombing of churches, and a cross being removed from St. Ephraim's Cathedral, the seat of the Syriac Orthodox Archdiocese in Mosul. These actions are an appalling blot on the proud tradition of pluralism in a region that has been home to Chaldeans, Assyrians, and other churches of the East for more than 1,700 years. Indeed, the destruction caused by the violence has engulfed all of the diverse populations that make up Iraq: the Turkmens, the Yazidis, the Sunnis and Shiites, Kurds, and tens of thousands of Arab families who have been uprooted from the region in fear of their lives. We have also viewed with concern the ongoing situation in Gaza and Israel, and leaving aside the horrors of that situation for a moment, have been particularly distressed by how the name of religion has been invoked to justify the murder of ordinary people. Statements posted by young people on social media justifying the taking of innocent lives as commandments from God, in quotation marks, are a testament to how the pressure of living under the threat of violence can cause the minds and moral compass of not just the military and seekers of power, but also that of ordinary civilians to atrophy. We should do all that we can to end the violence, even as the numbers of casualties rise on a daily basis. And then he quotes both Old Testament, the Quran, and the current Pope and a rabbi on peace and living with your neighbors. And while I don't want to sound like I'm supporting one world religion, which this article kind of has that tone to, I do believe he raises a very good point on religion and it being used by all religious sects to promote murder and justifying their actions. On Friday, July 25th, our first article here is Doctor uses personal firearm to stop active shooter at hospital. This was posted on to benswan.com, written by Barry Donegan. On Thursday afternoon, a psychiatric patient with a long rap sheet and history of suicide attempts began shooting at healthcare providers at the Sister Marie Linehan Wellness Center at Mercy Fitzgerald Hospital in Darby, PA, a suburb just south of Philadelphia. The gunman, who according to Philly.com was identified as Richard Plotz, fatally shot 53-year-old caseworker Teresa Hunt and wounded 52-year-old psychiatrist Dr. Lee Silverman. However, Plott's shooting rampage was cut short when Dr. Silverman produced his own personal firearm and shot Plotz 3 times. The incident began with Plotz open fired on Teresa Hunt, hitting her twice in the face and leading Silverman to reach for his own weapon. Dr. Silverman suffered a glancing bullet wound to the head but was able to recover and fire back at Plotz before anyone else was killed or wounded. After Silverman shot him 3 times, the gunman fled to the hallway where another doctor and caseworker tackled and restrained him. Richard Plotz is now in custody and in critical condition at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania with 2 wounds to the torso and another to the arm. There's a little bit more on police and local reports of the incident. Heritage data tool brings us culture economic together. This is posted at Pan Am Post, and it's about some findings by the Heritage Foundation related to immigration, economics, and the welfare state. It's a 99-page study released on Wednesday. It includes charts and analysis of 31 indicators. In particular, the authors assess how these indicators have changed over time. The way some conservatives talk about the border children is racist and revolting. This comes from Where.com, written by Jack Hunter. On the rhetoric and even on some bashing on conservatives who have sent foods and aids supplies to the children along the border. When Glenn Beck announced he would send food, medicine, and other aid to the border children recently, he was attacked viciously for it. He's not alone. I think this is very important to note. I mean, we complain about what a drain it is on taxes. So when people want to voluntarily do charity work, they're attacked by conservatives. That's ridiculous. I mean, if you don't want your taxes paying for it, why would you stop somebody else from sitting the necessities such as food and medicine? We're complaining about how they're a drain and they're a danger because of their medical condition. So somebody wants to send them medicine to relieve that problem. I mean, it may not be a total cure, but at least it can relieve some of the dire conditions and problems caused by mass institutionalizing people like this. And it says, if you ever wonder why many Hispanics think conservatives don't like them, it is because conservatives talk like they don't like them. The last few weeks have been stark reminders. And no matter what your belief is on the law and immigration policy, the bottom line is a lot of people are talking about these children as if they're subhuman, or even the adults as if they're subhuman just because they crossed the border. Well, newsflash, they're not subhuman even though they're lawbreakers. And the bottom line is all of us are lawbreakers. God's law, God's moral law, which is more important than our governmental laws, but with the regulations and constant, whether you're on your local level, your state or federal level, fact is most of us repeatedly break regulations and laws without even knowing it. We're all lawbreakers. So showing a little compassion and trying to alleviate the problem should not is no excuse for some of the vitriol coming out of some people's mouths or being posted on social media. Okay, Obama admin considers refugee status for use now in Honduras. Now this is an interesting one by the New American. Just one part that I wanted to quote, and they said, this was an unnamed person in the administration that brought this up, saying that they're considering it, but it's not a definite. It's just considering it. But this article reads, the current federal policy for refugees, according to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, is outlined in the USCIS's Refugee Asylum and International Operations Directorate, RAIO. The RAIO states, in order to be granted either asylum or refugee status, U.S. law requires that an applicant satisfy the definition of refugee under the Immigration and Nationality Act, INA. Now, the INA defines refugees as any person who is outside any country of such person's nationality, who is unable or unwilling to return to, and is unable or unwilling to avail himself or herself of the protection of that country because of persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. Now, I think this is interesting because if the Obama administration were to use this possible plan here, that means they'll be in Honduras before people even cross the border. So that breaks that definition of refugee right there, because they're still in their country of origin. Unless, of course, he's talking about taking people from Guatemala or such who've gone to Honduras. But still, pretty dicey there. And furthermore, if you're being persecuted based on race, religion, nationality, membership in particular social group, or political opinion, then they still wouldn't likely fall into the category of refugee, because a lot of these children in particular are actually escaping from the gangs. Now, unless you fit the fact that they don't want to be in the gangs and that they're escaping the gangs as persecution because the gangs are a particular social group, a refusal to join that particular social group, that could be the loophole that they're looking for to fit them under the definition of refugee, but that's still, I don't know, it's highly questionable there. Again, you can read the full article on our homepage. And the title of it is Obama Admin Considers Refugee Status for Use Now in Honduras. Our next article, Russia, China Care for Power, Not Latin America. This is an opinion piece from the Pan Am Post. Of course, it's on the tightening up of relationships between Russia and China with Central American countries. Ben Swan, media's poor coverage of MH17 disaster. This was an interview he did with RT, which is Russian TV. And so he has the clip of his interview there, as well as some quotes and information on how this story has progressed in the U.S. media. When addressing claims from U.S. officials saying the Ukrainian rebels received both the training and the equipment to potentially shoot down a plane from Russia, Swan uses the same a nudge and a wink scenario. U.S. officials tell journalists, we do not have any evidence that this missile came from Russia, and we don't even know that the training happened in Russia, but we are pretty sure. Again, we are not going to tell you who our sources are. They are speaking anonymously. Swan came to the conclusion that as all of this unravels, most media will begin to back away from it. Swan maintained that the biggest issue isn't with the media, it is with the consumers of media, the listeners, the watchers, the readers. Most people don't go to news outlets to be informed. They go there to be validated on the belief system they already hold, said Swan. Those who want to believe that Russia is responsible will continue to seek out sources that tell them that Russia may be responsible. On the other hand, those who want to believe in some other story will be seeking those sources. I think that's a very good point on that and how we use our media. It's true. We see a story posted on social media, and then we hunt down to see some kind of validation of our worldview on that. Can Iraq's new president save country from fragmenting? This is from El Monitor. Also, Islamic State destroys sacred shrines in Mosul. Again, this is from almonitor.com. See, previously, IS, which is the Islamic State, had carried out numerous bombings destroying important cultural sites such as the shrine of the prophet Daniel west of Mosul, the shrine of one of the grandchildren of the second Caliph Omar bin al-Khattab, as well as mosques, various shrines, and numerous other churches. These sites are not only for Shiite Muslims or non-Muslims. Most of them are sacred places for Sunni Muslims as well, and some are even only affiliated with them, in addition to a significant number of statues of famous figures and other cultural sites that also were destroyed. Sources inside the city confirmed this information to Al Monitor. Activists on social media networks uploaded pictures and several videos showing the magnitude of the destruction of cultural sites around the city. Sources told Al Monitor that a state of sorrow and regret reigns in the city, and that there have been plenty of people crying while witnessing the destruction of Jonah's tomb. Jonah is considered sacred by all Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. What these groups are doing is based on an endemic Salafist principle common to most Salafist movements, whether they are jihadists or not. This principle underlines the need to purify the earth of polytheism and disbelief. These groups consider religious shrines or any other sites related to a certain person to be a kind of sanctification, which is, according to them, a true sign of polytheism. But, yeah, I think that's interesting because in a lot of ways that also wipes out a lot of your history. And I don't know, it's kind of like book burning in some ways, because if you erase the memories of historical figures, whether they're religious or not, over the next generation, they won't have that monument to point to and ask, grandfather, what was that about? And in the Old Testament, God would tell the Israelites after certain events to build either a pile of rocks of some sort so that their children could point to it and say, what was that about? It's our history. It's a monument to remind us so that the generations will remember to keep on asking, and so that they can in turn tell the next generation what had occurred. And of course, the Old Testament, it was all for the honor and glory of God. In a secular perspective, though, if we don't remember our history, we're doomed to repeat, the negative things. So, the ISIS, or IS as they're called now, they're destroying not just the Christians, but all other sets of Muslims, of religious groups, culture, history, just wiping it all out. Okay, also, Iran, Hezbollah break with Assad to support Hamas. This is also from Al Monitor. And Hezbollah is a terrorist group that it's hard to keep track of all the alliances and things, and there are several different groups that's been associated with Al Qaeda. That they're similar, but they're in different countries. And on this one, the current war in Gaza has witnessed renewed contact between Hamas on the one hand and Iran and Hezbollah on the other, following 2 years of chill in relations. So, sometimes these groups, they don't always get along with one another, but when they get united by a common enemy, then that thaws some of their relations there. I don't have anything on Saturday. I'm certain there was probably a lot of stuff that happened. I didn't happen to see in particular articles. Like most stuff I saw posted on or shared on Saturday were actually originally posted on Friday or Thursday. Moving on to Sunday, July 27th. Air Algeria plane crashes in militant-held Mali region. So we have yet another plane crash in what's considered a war zone. This time it's not Malaysia Air. The worst week of air disasters in history has continued today with the Air Algeria Flight 5017, the latest plane to crash, apparently killing all 116 people on board. Once again, a civilian airliner has gone down in a war zone. Flight 5017 went down in northern Mali, where various Al-Qaeda-linked factions are known to be active, but conspicuously there was none of the speculation surrounding previous crashes like MH17 in Ukraine, and even before the plane was found, Malian officials were quick to dismiss it as a random lightning strike. Monday, July 28th, so this is today. This morning I got 2 stories posted at Issue Open Carry Guns. This is from Mansfield News Journal, so this is a local story on Ohio and its open gun carry policies. I believe the story was actually originally posted on Sunday evening, but it was edited this morning, and so that's why their date on it now is Monday, so I just went ahead and put it in the Monday category. In our final story, FBI whistleblower and teacher exposes Islamic Gulen movement infiltrating U.S. through charter schools. Now, on one hand, personally, I hate articles that vilify, or not vilify, but are harsh or negative about charter schools. But this one, no, you have to, because there is this particular movement within charter schools that has a radical Islam component to it. And there's an FBI whistleblower on here, as well as some teachers talking about this. I'm going to scroll down towards, I guess, halfway in this article. From WikiLeaks, we are concerned by the link with charter schools in the U.S. that have petitioned for marginally qualified H-1B candidates. The Kentucky Counselor Center and Our Post in Turkey have started compiling a list of these Gulenist charter schools in the U.S. for use in visa adjudication. These applicants were simply not convincing, did not seem as fully in tune with Gulen's approach to education, and might be using the reputation of the school as a cover to get to the U.S. Recently, FBI agents carried out raids at 19 Gulen charter schools in Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio as part of an ongoing white-collar crime matter. Many oppose the Gulen movement due to their lack of transparency, the cloud of suspicion regarding their funding hierarchy, their pursuit of buying political influence, and their true purposes, and leaving U.S. taxpayers in the dark. Taxpayers being forced to indirectly support Islamist movements is one thing, but is there something more insidious planned by the Gulen movement? While Gulen followers and some U.S. officials claim Gulen teaches a moderate version of Islam, some believe it is only part of a strategy to infiltrate the U.S. According to the Middle East Quarterly in 1999, Turkish television aired footage of Gulen delivering sermons which revealed his plan to implement Sharia law and use controversial tactics to achieve those goals. And it has a quote from that sermon. Is Gulen a front for the CIA? A classified communication reveals that many secularists in Turkey are convinced that the ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, is the creation of the United States government, USG, and that Washington bolsters and funds the Fethullah Gulen movement. Is the CIA or another agency in the USG using the Gulen movement to fund Cold War operations overseas? Is the USG using the Gulen Islamic schools to influence Central Asia with a more moderate, in quotation marks, version of Islam to rival more racial Islamic sects? Some claim that Gulen is a front for the CIA. See here and here. And it gives links. If there is anyone who knows the truth about the inner workings of U.S. and Turkey relations, it is FBI whistleblower Sybil Edmonds. Edmonds is considered the most gagged person in American history. The USG invoked state secret privilege in her case, and she is prevented from revealing government corruption and cannot discuss certain aspects of her knowledge regarding her case. The DOJ's Inspector General stated her claims are credible, and Edmonds says her claims can be backed up by FBI files. And of course, it has more. This is actually a very long article covering different news reports and leaks on this particular group and coordination of charter schools. Now, I'm not against Muslims having not public schools, but private schools like Catholics. Catholics are big on having their private institutions. Okay, fine. Religious freedom, that dictates, let them do their thing. However, taxpayer money, it means that we'd be supporting that. And so, no, if you want your private schools, have a private school. Don't use the charter school system. That's my opinion on that. And that was our last story. And of course, we are, oh my goodness, way over time again. So let's move on to our Proverbs for the day. Yeah, there's always a lot of news to cover. And even if I only quote just a little bit here and there to give you guys some idea of the article other than the title and its source, it's going to take some time to get through it. A lot of titles, I don't like reading just the titles of articles because it really doesn't give you enough information. Most titles are designed to be very bombastic, attention grabbing, just for the sake of attention grabbing. Alright, we're on Proverbs chapter 28. The wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion. For the transgression of a land many are the princes thereof, but by a man of understanding and knowledge the state thereof shall be prolonged. A poor man that oppresseth the poor is like a sweeping rain, which leaveth no food. They that forsake the law praise the wicked, but such as keep the law contend with them. Evil men understand not judgment, but they that seek the Lord understand all things. Better is the poor that walketh in his uprightness than he that is perverse in his ways, though he be rich. Whoso keepeth the law is a wise son, but he that is a companion of riotous men shameth his father. He that by usury and unjust gain increaseth his substance, he shall gather it for him that will pity the poor. He that turneth away his ear from hearing the law, even his prayer shall be abomination. Whoso causeth the righteous to go astray in an evil way, he shall fall himself into his own pit. But the upright shall have good things in possession. The rich man is wise in his own conceit, but the poor that hath understanding searcheth him out. When righteous men do rejoice, there is great glory, but when the wicked rise, a man is hidden. He that covereth his sins shall not prosper, but whoso confesseth and forsaketh them shall have mercy. Happy is the man that feareth always, but he that hardeneth his heart shall fall into mischief. As a roaring lion and a raging bear, so is a wicked ruler over the poor people. The prince that wanteth understanding is also a great oppressor, but he that hateth covetousness shall prolong his days. A man that doeth violence to the blood of any person shall flee to the pit. Let no man stay him. Whoso walketh uprightly shall be saved, but he that is perverse in his ways shall fall at once. He that tilleth his land shall have plenty of bread, but he that followeth after vain persons shall have poverty enough. A faithful man shall abound with blessings, but he that maketh haste to be rich shall not be innocent. To have respect of persons is not good, for a piece of bread that man will transgress. He that hasteth to be rich hath an evil eye, and considereth not that poverty shall come upon him. He that rebuketh a man afterwards shall find more favor than he that flattereth with the tongue. Whoso robbeth his father or his mother, and saith, It is not transgression, the same is the companion of a destroyer. He that is of a proud heart stirreth up strife, but he that putteth his trust in the Lord shall be made fat. He that trusteth in his own heart is a fool, but whoso walketh wisely, he shall be delivered. He that giveth unto the poor shall not lack, but he that hideth his eyes shall have many a curse. When the wicked rise, men hide themselves, but when they perish, the righteous increase.